Well, folks, once again, this is Captain Boat Builder coming to you from my basement boatyard. I'd like to welcome you back. Today it's going to be episode number 3, and we're going to call it It's Only Make Believe. The name comes from a great song written by Conway Twitty and his drummer quite a while ago. He's been dead, unfortunately, since 1993. It's a great song, and you'll see the link between the lyrics and what's going on here in the basement boatyard toward the end. One note for those of you who might have been paying attention to the last episode and managed to stay awake, I did make a mistake as I was showing the different parts to the boat that came out of the kit, and I was trying to highlight the beautiful CNC cutting job that was done to fair the rudder blade and the dagger board. And I zeroed in on the rudder and I said it was the dagger board, but it's not. What we were looking at was the rudder, and the dagger board fairing is the same, super high quality. Today we're going to be talking about putting fiberglass on the planks. You've seen this before. I've pretty much done it again. The difference is that instead of putting on 2 coats, the first coat to secure the fiberglass, the second one to fill the weave, and then later, much later in the build, to put on the final coat, what they call the gloss coat. I actually put 3 coats on right away, again, one right after another at about 4-hour intervals. And I did that so that there'd be more resin buildup so that I could do some extra sanding to try and get it super smooth. I'll also show you briefly the fiberglass work on some of the other bulkheads, and then also the gluing together of the gunnels, 3 pieces each, and how I did that. It worked out quite well. And then at the end, I've got a little segment that'll tie it all together and show you the make-believe part. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Again, number 3, it's only make-believe. This is after the second application of resin. You can see now that the weave is completely gone. The fiberglass cloth itself is almost invisible. It's almost completely disappeared. What's left is just some bubbles on the surface. I think I'm going to be able to take care of those with a foam brush using the tip method after the 3rd application. This has been mentioned before by many people, but I just wanted to mention it again because it's potentially so dangerous. This little tiny edge right here, this is the 1 layer of 4-ounce cloth that's impregnated with resin. It's been cut, but I haven't sanded it back yet. And when you're handling these pieces of wood, or when you're working on this edge and you're sanding it flush, be sure to wear some gloves and be very careful, because I can tell you this edge, it's as sharp as a razor, and I've cut myself badly. So again, be careful handling these pieces. Here are the other 3 hull panels. You got the center panel and the 2 top panels. First coat of epoxy, and you can see clearly here what it looks like with the weave only saturated with 1 coat. So here we have the backseat bulkhead. We've got the mast step bulkhead. And here we've got the inside of the transom. And what I've done with these is I've put on the fiberglass in the correct areas. And I put 3 coats, one right after another, with about 4 hours in between, maybe 4.5 hours. We get a nice chemical bond. The 3rd coat would have normally been the gloss coat, but I'm going to do some extra sanding, get it as smooth as possible. And so yes, there's still going to be 1 more coat of epoxy on these pieces. And in a little bit, I'll be able to show you how I've put the transom former on. Looks like it's going to go just as they expected. Here's the transom former with the screws and the plastic and everything already cut. And I'll be bending these to shape before the epoxy does the final hardening. Should get a better shape out of it. So here's my finished transom and transom former. This part of the transom is the inside. The top part here is fiberglassed as per the instructions. This part is coated with epoxy, but not fiberglassed. This is where the edge of the seat is going to be. Here on the back, you can see how the transom is fitted to the transom former. It's secured and bent into shape with little screws. You can see what you're drilling into, what you're screwing into is pretty small. They recommend using an 1/8 inch drill to do the pilot hole. I found that I couldn't keep the 1/8 inch centered on the center ply. There's 5 plies here. So I used a 1/16 of an inch to drill a very small pilot hole and then a slightly larger one. Also, you'll notice here that I've used plastic underneath the wood blocks, and that's because, and this is a point I did want to make, it helps to read ahead a little bit in the instruction book, because after you do all the fiberglass work on the transom, on the inside of the transom, you realize that right here, he says, it's a good idea to bend the transom into shape before the epoxy and fiberglass on the inside cures to full hardness. So what I did, and again, remember, I'm coating these 3 times. The fiberglass coat, the fill coat, and then the gloss coat. I'm actually doing that in advance because there'll probably be more. But to get this bent and curved before the fiberglass and the epoxy reached full hardness, I had to bend it when this surface was just set up enough so that I could handle it. And I put these little pieces of plastic in here so that these wood blocks would not stick. And I wound up with a nice curve in the transom, and it's hard as a rock, and it worked out well. But I would like to remind you that sometimes it helps to go ahead in the instructions, because this is on page 26, and the gluing up of these pieces is on page 24. And so if you didn't read ahead, you wouldn't have realized that that was a little tip to do the bending and the screwing into the transom former before the fiberglass gets a chance to turn rock hard. And it just makes the bending easier. Well, I've finished gluing up all the scarf joints to connect the 3 pieces, the 3 sections of gunnel, 3 for each side. And it followed pretty much exactly what's described in the manual. A couple of things I wanted to point out. These 3 pieces for each side that form the gunnels, when you get them, they're going to have these little bumps right here. And this is part of the CNC cutting process. This is a guide, and you have to clear those bumps. And what I found was they're pretty easily taken off carefully with a chisel. Another thing I wanted to pass on to you is that when you're cutting those things off, you don't have to be especially careful. Here's one right here that I removed. It's not quite removed all the way. But what I realized is that the inside of the gunnel is the part that's going to be glued to the hull. So this is going to be glued to the hull planking, and the outside is going to be covered up with a rub rail. So those surfaces don't have to be especially perfect. What is important is the top piece. The top is going to be shown. It's going to be part of the brightwork, the gunnel construction. And underneath, the part underneath isn't going to show either, because it's going to be projecting out from the hull and you won't see it. And also, in most boats, it's going to be covered with fiberglass. So I pretty much finished this up. I did notice that just as it said, this end grain soaks up the epoxy really fast. I put the first coat on and it sank in quite a bit. I waited about 10 minutes, put another coat on, and there was much better coverage. And then I used the mix of thickeners that they recommend, and I found that 2 pumps from the resin pump was plenty. Actually, maybe 2.5. What I did find is with this thing, I think it's called exotherm, where a lump of mixed epoxy tends to heat up and thicken. This stuff thickened up pretty fast. So as they say, have all your preparations ready and be ready to do it quickly. And I think you'll wind up with a pretty nice product. I also noticed that as I put this together, it seems like it's more important than ever to be sure that your table is flat. Flat this way, and level. Because when you clamp these sections of the gunnel together, they're going to have to sit on the table, and that helps with the orientation of the joints. So be sure that your table is nice and flat and level. Check it again. And I think you'll find that this phase goes pretty well as described in the manual. And as you can see with all the stuff I've got scattered all over the table, it is important to have all of your stuff, all of your clamps, pieces of plastic, tape, etc. Have this stuff all ready before you start messing with the glue. So after I glued the sections of the gunnels together, I started thinking, I've got enough pieces here that I can put this boat together with some clamps and some tape just to get an idea of what the proportions are and how I'm going to fit into it. You can see here that the bow is probably just a little bit higher than it should be. My boxes weren't quite the right size. And you can also see that what I would call the spear, this central piece of wood that's eventually going to hold the mast, the dagger board. There's going to be a hatch in here. You can see from the trailing edge here, right here, you can see that it probably still needs to go forward another 2 or 3 inches. But that'll give you an idea of what the space looks like on both sides of this thing that they refer to as the spear. The main bulkhead is here. It's not finished. It has more reinforcing pieces to go, and it's just clamped. And then back here, you can get a good idea of how big the back seat is. It's actually quite large. Certainly big enough for a person or a child to sit. And that's the tiller without the hiking stick. I'll be talking about that in just a little bit. But anyhow, I got impatient and I decided that I would put all these things together just to see what the proportions were on the boat. I've got these cushions piled up here so that I'll have something to support this side of the boat, because I'm going to be leaning back against it, simulating sitting in the boat in the position where I'll be doing the sailing. And I'll have a few more shots here in just a second. Well, folks, this is Captain Boat Builder in his basement boatyard, and I'm calling this little segment The Boys in the Boat. These are my 2 grandsons. 1 potato, 2 potato. No, that's not your name. Grant and Luke. And I'm doing this because I wanted you to see just how much space you'll have in the boat that's usable. You can see easily that 2 children can sit in these spaces, or when this is finished, they could be sitting up here. And you can see that this is about the amount of space that I'm gonna have in this part of the boat for myself. And I'm not quite sure structurally, but I think that this part that sticks out is actually an armrest. I'm not quite sure why it's here. It's not explained. But anyhow, you can see that I've got to get a longer tiller, but you can see that it's pretty easy to sit here. The angle is good for your back. You put your feet up on the other side and you go sailing. So, boys in the boat.
What?
When the boat's finished, do you want to go sailing with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So now you've seen the make-believe part of today's video. I really enjoyed putting it together, just the skeleton. I enjoyed sitting in it on the floor, trying to imagine myself sailing with my 2 grandsons. And even though it's only an 11-foot boat, it's surprisingly roomy. I think it's just going to be a great boat for me by myself, or for me with the little kids. So that was the make-believe part, make-believe sailing. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. So long.